Stories is what connects us to each other, right? I mean, we used to deliver all of our history, all of our learnings around the campfire, as Neanderthals and onward. And so I think there's still a huge untapped potential in the gaming industry to use story even more in any kind of game, entertainment, and also serious.
Welcome to Tech Inspired. My name is Priska and I am your host today. With this podcast, we want to inspire and empower more women to start a career in tech. We interview on a regular basis exciting guests from the tech industry who share their stories, insights, and career advice. Let's get started to build your best career in tech. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to Rosemary Lockhorst. We've met through LinkedIn because you are an ambassador of women in gaming. And this is why I came across your profile and I was very intrigued by all the things you have done and reached out to you. And we had already the chance to chat before. We also worked together when we were judging for bachelor thesis a couple of weeks ago. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Rosy and hear more about her story. But first of all, introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Priska, and thank you very much for this opportunity and for having me. I look forward to all the questions. So, my name's Rosy, and I'm in what's called serious gaming. So we use gaming for serious purposes, and that can be anything from like a game that focuses on teen mental health and helping them through anxiety or through difficult times in their life, to potentially things like, sales trainings for large corporations. So it's just basically using gaming for something different than entertainment. And as much as I can, I try to take on projects that really also have a cause for good, if you want, attached to it. I got into this about 7 years ago, something like that. Before that, I was in general tech. I was in sustainable development, urban sustainable development, using technology to improve the lives of people around cities. And that's a subject that's now called smart cities. And there I was introduced to using gaming and simulation to develop urban environments, a bit like playing SimCity in real life. And so that's where I saw the potential for using games for serious purposes. And so I set up my own company called StoryByte Studios and have been doing serious gaming ever since.
That's so interesting. And I think gaming is very important in today's life in every aspect. But let's go back first to your early beginnings. Was tech something that was in your life when you were already a kid, or how did you have the first interaction with technology?
It's a fun question that I've actually never been asked. So in hindsight, I probably should have noticed that would have been a good career for me, because I had my first computer when I was 9, which in the 80s wasn't really very normal for girls to have a computer, her own computer, nevertheless, right? And so my dad gave me this gaming computer. It was a Commodore 64 and it had a nice joystick and some games on it. And so I've been playing games since I was basically young, which was not common then. But then when I went to high school and then also went on to college, I didn't really think of that. For me, it wasn't really something that you saw. It wasn't taught in school. We didn't have IT in school like they do now. We had nothing like that. We didn't have smartphones. So the affinity with technology wasn't very common in Switzerland in the 80s. And so after high school, I actually decided to do hotel management, because that was a good way to be able to pay my own tuition, because you had to work in between. It was something that I thought, it's nice to have contact with people. And so that's what I did, until finally after, when I finished, I was working as a director in an Irish hotel. And my brother actually came up to me, and he was a software engineer. And he said, you're doing something wrong, Rosy. You're working all hours and you make no money. You should do what I do. I work all hours and I make a ton of money. And so that sounded really nice. This is like right before the .com hit. And so I switched. I went into software. started as a software tester. And then basically from there worked my way up through project development, business development, sales, and then more management jobs, if you will. But yeah, I guess you could say it was my young brother that got me into it.
But you just made it sounding so easy. So I just switched into software development and started as a tester. Was it that easy at that time?
It kind of was at that time, because I mean, the lucky part was this was the time when, you know, there were web companies sprouting up everywhere and they couldn't find people. And so they also took people from different professions. So it didn't really matter. And if you worked hard and if you showed that you worked hard, and I guess I was a little bit lucky because the first company wasn't great, but the second company I went into, they were actually really open to ideas and to you bringing in input, because they wanted to grow fast. It was a Swiss company. They developed an ERP system. They were in good competition with SAP. They're young people and they wanted to grow. We basically doubled in size in 1 year. And so at that time, you couldn't find that many software engineers. And so I started as a software tester, and then only, I believe, about 5 or 6 months into it, they actually asked me to come into a meeting to help them translate some stuff, because I know a couple of languages. And in that meeting, when I took notes and I translated, they said they needed a project manager for the development group, for the business objects of their ERP system. And so I just pitched and I said, hey, why don't you take me? How about you give me the job? And if I do a good job, you let me keep it after 3 months. And if not, you know, no harm, no foul, right? At least you've done some work. And they said yes to that, to my surprise. And so I walked out of there, and I remember calling my father and saying, Dad, what does a project manager do? And he laughed, and he just got back to me. He's like, well, basically, you know, you give people tasks, you make a list of those tasks, and you check if they're done. I'm like, done, I can do that. Little, of course, did I know that anybody could tell you anything of how long it would take to develop a module or to write lines of code, and I didn't code, so I had no clue. And so the next year was spent every evening. A colleague would help me learn to code from 9 o'clock until 1 a.m. in the morning. And he would explain to me the tasks that my team were doing. Then the next day I would look clever in front of my team. And in the meantime, my dad would look up on the internet. And this is in the times of internet when people would print out everything, right? So he would look up stuff on the internet about software development methods and you know, project management methods and things like that. And then he would give me a crash course right before I started in the morning while I was driving to work. So that's basically how I then kept my job, if you will.
So that sounds like a big team, family work to get you into this position. But it's kind of funny when I listen to what you say. I think we can fast forward and say it's 2022, because we are exactly in the same situation. If you look at the industry, everybody is looking for software engineers and there aren't any. Maybe we should listen or more look what you have done and reuse what you have done in today's world again.
Yeah, I think this is a great chance. And I mean, I've always said this. As you know, I'm big on helping other women. I really think that there is not enough women in the industry. I can't believe that in 2022, we're still talking about women's equality, but it's true. We are still talking about it. And I think these kinds of opportunities, like, you know, this year where they're just really looking for people so hard, it's a great opportunity to just get in on the ground floor. I mean, I struck a deal with them and I said, look, I'll work hard. You don't have to pay me any overtime, but in return, I want an education. And so they paid for my school, for example. So I did the master's degree on their dime and then studied in my own time on top of, you know, my dad and on top of my colleague teaching me how to code. And it was tough for like 2 years. But it really helped me a lot because A, I got that discipline, B, I got the chance, and they saw me less as a woman, but they saw me as a person that really would do whatever it took to get the job done. And that reputation that I built in those 2 years has helped me ever since.
So what was your master's degree then in?
It was computer applications. It doesn't really exist anymore, I don't think. But basically, it was a combination of software engineering, but also with a little bit of economy. So, you know, how do you sell those things? How do you market and those kind of things?
Yeah, I think today it's what something similar I did was called in German Wirtschaftsinformatikerin or Management Information System. I think that's very similar to that.
Yeah, very, very similar.
Yeah. So you had your first opportunity to become a project manager. What was next then? What did you do once you proved yourself?
Well, unfortunately, that went quite wrong after a while because the company went bankrupt. Part of the company got bought then by a different Swiss company, and some of the code ended up in Microsoft's ERP system over time. So some of my code still runs somewhere, but it's been a long time. But when they went bankrupt, that was very abrupt. I had 38 people working for me at the time, and in the morning we learned that I had to let go of 19, and that they wanted to go half force. They wanted to continue, and then I did that in one day. I fired 19 people. And in the late afternoon, it turned out we had to close the entire company, and we were actually escorted out by the police because we weren't allowed to take anything. And so that was a bit of a rough patch. The other thing that was just really remarkable at that time was that as we were walking out with our little boxes, Siemens, Oracle, Microsoft, they were all waiting outside with flyers asking us to come work for them, basically, which was just none of us. I mean, this was a small company, and it was, it was very public in Switzerland, but it was a small company. We all really loved the team. And so for us, all of us basically walked out of there and were like, no, not now. We just wanted to go home. However, of course, we did take the flyers, obviously. And so we kind of organized little buses that went around for interviews at Oracle and other places. And Siemens, I had a really bad time personally at that time. And so I didn't really want to work at all for a bit. I wasn't doing very well health-wise. I had cancer, and I had, all kinds of stuff happening. But Siemens kept on calling and kept on calling and kept on calling. And so in the end, that's what I did. I started working for Siemens in their mobile division in web development. And from just being a developer there, I quickly again went more into project management and consulting, but this time on the customer side. So really running customer projects. From there, I moved more into a little bit business development / consulting. So selling your own consulting and your own team, if you will. And then again, the same thing happened. Siemens actually closed their entire mobile division Europe-wide, laid off 25,000 people. So therefore, I had to look again. And that was my first sort of run-in with being a woman in IT, because before I'd never really encountered the problem. I just worked. And yes, later on, I did acknowledge that I got paid less than guys did for the exact same job. But in the end, also, have to be fair, I didn't have any experience, right? I did the job, but yeah, I did a lot of learning on the job too. But then at Siemens, when we had this, right before all of this happened, we had this conversation about women, and I wanted another degree. And basically Siemens told me, well, can't remember, 27, 28, something like that at the time. And they said, well, you're almost 30. So your biological clock will start to tick. So it's not really worth the investment for us. And I took the Siemens values, and according to the values, I listed what they didn't do, even though it was their values. And I sent that email directly to the CEO of Switzerland. And then the whole department closed. And that same day, I got an invite from the CEO to talk to him. But in the meantime, of course, I went around already for jobs. And because I was so angry at what happened with women in tech, I marched into IBM, I think, I can't remember, but I ended up at Compaq, and I walked in there and I said, I'm applying for a job. And they're like, which one? I was like, I don't know yet, but if I could speak to one of your HR managers, that would be great. I'm happy to buy them a coffee. And one of the HR managers was intrigued by that. He's like, you do realize though that coffee is free here, right? I'm like, sorry. But he's like, okay, so what are you looking for? And I said, oh, here's what I've done, right? And he's like, okay, so what do you not want? Well, the one thing I don't want is, to be judged based on whether I'm a woman or a man. I just want a job, basically. And they called me back the next morning, and they offered me a job. And this was right before I went into that CEO meeting at Siemens. So I went in there, and they basically said, we want you back. And I said, well, sorry, but I now have a new job with more pay and, better hours. And so I'm leaving. So that was like a very interesting moment. Also seeing that Siemens was then suddenly ready to offer me 40% more pay and ready to offer me different hours and, ready to do all kinds of stuff, right? Just because I had gone and found myself a different job. So that was a very worthy lesson. And then ever since that time, I've been more in sales. So it's been more sales jobs, international account management. Compaq, I obviously went to HP because, they got bought. And then from HP, I went to a small company that wanted a CEO, a software company for banks. They did very boring software, but a very successful software for the ATMs. And that was a great job too. got me some management experience. And then from there, I got the offer from Microsoft. So usually larger companies, basically, until I then started in that urban sustainable development.
But it sounds to me you never really had to like do a lot to get a job. So you mentioned that you applied for
Yes.
Compact, but after that, a lot
Correct.
of companies reached out to you. Were you?
Correct.
Is it just because you had this interesting profile and the times were really desperate for finding talent, or is there something you think you did differently than maybe some other women or men in the industry?
That's a good question. I think it's a combination. I mean, look, timing is always important. And also, as Malcolm Gladwell said, you need hours, right? There's this theory of you need 10,000 hours to be good at your job. And if you are, things can start to happen. But timing is always, obviously, it's a good thing. For me, I think one of the things that I've done differently is I was really good at keeping my network. So wherever I went, I mean, I sent Christmas cards. I handwritten Christmas cards to customers for years and years and years. I don't now anymore because now it's frowned upon. But I used to do that for years and years and years. I always, and I still do that every 6 months. I reach out to everybody that I don't work with anymore and just say, hey, what's up? How are you doing? How are things? Where did you end up? How are you feeling? Those kind of things. And I think that helps too. And so generally, if I kind of then voiced, I'm not really happy where I am, something would pop up. I think as you said, the only exception was that really spur of the moment decision to just drive to companies and say that I wanted a job, which is just, I don't know how I was just angry that day. I was angry and I sat in the car and instead of going home, I just decided to do a tour. And it's easy in Switzerland because in Zurich, all the companies are close together, right? So you can do like 5 companies in one day and somebody's bound to say yes, right? Do a coffee at least, right? And so somebody did. But yeah, you're right. After that, Astis, which was a German company, they saw me on LinkedIn because a customer had just given me a good review because I said I'm unhappy, and he's like, "Oh, let me give you a review just in case you're looking for a job." So that popped up, I guess. And then at Microsoft, it was people from Compact that had all moved over to Microsoft, and they said, "Look, half the team's here. Why don't you come too?" Basically. And so we just started to look around. That was actually a funny part as well, because at Microsoft, you have to have 6 interviews before you're accepted, but nobody wanted to interview. The HR manager didn't contact me for like 4 weeks or something. I had one interview with what was going to be my boss. And then I had 4 weeks wait time. And I called her up and I said, so, what's happening? I mean, I just like to know. And she said, well, I'm actually having issues getting an interview for you because everybody says they know you already and to just hire you. But I have to do these 6 interviews. It's the process. So I'm just trying to find people. So it's, Switzerland is small. I think that helps a lot. I think in Switzerland, you have a great opportunity. If you're good to your network, I think then good things will come to you.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of what you just said is all dependent on network. So it's so important to have a network and also to spend time for your network. As you said, that you will reach out to everyone you haven't been in touch for a while, that you reach out, and not just at the point where you lose your job and you're looking for something new, which usually happens. And then when you get this request and you read in the newspaper, oh, company XYZ just went bankrupt or got bought, and then all of a sudden everybody from this company is reaching out, exactly what's happening. And that's not really a good way of creating or building up a network.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, treat your network, your business network, a bit like friends. I mean, they don't have to be best friends, but it's just common decency, to ask if you see major life changes, or because nowadays you see those on LinkedIn, or if somebody's taking a long trip or a sabbatical, I just reach out and say, hey, how is that? How are you doing? Like somebody I've worked with at HP in 2002 or something like that is now just moved to San Diego. And so I just reached out. I was like, oh my God, that's so different from Seattle. How are you doing? Just, it's small things like that. I think that can go a long way. And that helps a lot. And it also means that it doesn't actually necessarily, have to be that they have a good impression of the entire company. It's just the impression, I guess, that you leave with. That's really important to build your network, because large companies can do good things, but they can also, do bad things. When I left HP, it was not under fantastic circumstances, I would say, just because the customer that I taken care of, they weren't very interested in doing the right thing for them. And so I said, look, I can't do my job. So I'm leaving. But I'm still to date, even though 2 of these people at that customer have now gone, they're retired, I'm still in contact with them.
Let's get to the current situation. So you started your own company, you're into gaming. Tell us, how did this happen?
Yeah, again, a little bit of serendipity. I was at the Urban Sustainable Development Company, and after a while, I hit the sort of a glass ceiling, and I couldn't do more. I could contribute and I could do the work, but I wouldn't get the title. And so at that time, I decided, you know what, I need a little break, and I went to the US. And I stepped out of tech entirely, and I did a class at the New York Film Academy for screenwriting. And there I got in touch again with somebody that I met in the other company. And when she heard that I was doing storytelling and trying to do something about film, she said, well, I'd be very interested in storytelling. And actually, I have this book and I want to turn it into a digital product. And it's a book that helps young people deal with chronic illnesses. It helps them build up strength, resilience in their minds to be able to handle what's coming to them. And so I thought that was really cool. And I looked at her and I remember going, well, I think if you want to reach teens, you need to make a game, because that's where they're at. Why not bring psychological content to them instead of pushing them into like a PDF or a book to read, like a digital book? And she just looked at me and she said, like Pong? I said, no, actually, we've moved on a bit. And so I showed her some things, and she's like, you know what? I think that's awesome. Not those words, but she thought that was really cool. And basically, she said, why don't you do it? And I was like, hold that thought. And so I went back and I decided, well, if I want to take this gig, I can do it as a freelancer, or this is like the second time I've seen that gaming really works for something, and that it could potentially do something good. And so I decided to set up my own company instead. And we're very small. It's just me and 2 other people. But the idea is not to have like a humongous company, but to have like a more of a network of people who can add value to projects. And because of that, being able to really freely pick and choose the projects instead of having to find the next project just to make sure to keep the lights on. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So we've worked on that on the game called Shadow's Edge, which is the first mental health game for teens. Done that for 7 years. And in the meantime, I've started working on concepts for large companies using VR for an oil platform to teach them how to maintain their systems, because flying a helicopter over to fix something that could have been done if you just read the manual is a lot cheaper than VR is a lot cheaper in that case. I've worked on like a disaster relief application to teach people sort of the first aid if things like tsunamis and others happen. We've done a concept for a beverage company that wanted to help their mom and pop shops in Latin America figure out and learn how they actually run a mom and pop shop, because a lot of those kiosks, they open and then 3 months later they close because those people don't know what they're doing. They have no education. And so it's better for the beverage company to actually help them. They're getting long-term customers. And so we did a concept for a simulation game that they're now building to run a kiosk. So those are the kind of things that I like working on. And that's led to other opportunities like judging or, helping with awards for serious games and things like that.
Amazing. I think there's so much potential in gaming, and as you just said, it's in every industry and every life area there is a potential to use gaming to help people. So I think you're in the right place, and I'm looking forward to see more games.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we don't build the games ourselves. So for the mental health game, we had a company in the Netherlands, a gaming studio called Little Chicken Game Company, which was amazing, and they built it for us. But what I love about being about what I do now is we're able to just like get in right at the start. Think, what could you do? Does a game even make sense? I mean, that's one. It could be nowadays. It could be metaverse. It could be interactive video. It could be, so it's not just gaming. It could be NFTs, something like that. But getting in on the start and figuring out how to, and then also setting up the right mechanisms to really prove afterwards that what you're doing has an effect. because I think that's something that's really neglected. And then the large middle bar of, you know, project managing and just running or producing the game, most of that I don't do that. We hand that out to gaming studios.
This is an important part you do, because otherwise all the development effort would be useless if you don't have a clear purpose or use case for all this.
And it's the creative part, right? I mean, I get to work with these amazing studios, different types of studios, and you know, they're all the creative people. I get to work on the storytelling, which is really what I like doing. I'm still dabbling in film scripts and stuff, so you know, I like that story part of it, and that story can actually be attached to the purpose. So that's the most fun part. And then we have somebody in my team that does all the setup for testing, analytics, and things like that. And then we have somebody that really focuses more on like the user research end of it. So how do we measure, and what do we measure, and why? And we have psychologists that we work with, you know, to see what the impact is and the implications are. And somebody that really works well on social media to, you know, help, because, you know, serious games have different purposes, right? And so it's different audiences. You market not just generally, but you actually, like for the game Shadow's Edge, we had to also try and market to hospitals, for example. And so those kind of things we figure out, and we help companies set that up.
And what do you think, where is the future for your area, like for gaming, but also maybe you can take a general guess on the tech industry? Where do you see the future of it?
That's a big question. I think let's start with my area. I think in my area, storytelling will merge even more. I mean, now, you know, there's so many things like AR, VR, metaverse, everywhere. There's bits and pieces of the bigger story that are being put out. There's worlds being built, there's characters being made, there's tasks and mechanics being driven. But I think what we need to, and hopefully we will see even more, is that those are also really connected with a purpose and with a story. And by story, I really mean a proper story, not just saying, okay, well, this is my world and this person needs to get from A to B, but really why, you know, why is that person doing it? And why is that character the way that the character is? And really sort of seeing a little bit techniques that you see from storytelling on TV and in books really come into gaming more. I see that there is a lot more potential there, because stories is what connects us to each other, right? I mean, we used to deliver all of our history, all of our learnings around the campfire, you know, as Neanderthals and onward. And so I think there's still a huge untapped potential in the gaming industry to use story even more in any kind of game, entertainment and also serious. So I think that's something that we see more. I think also technologies will merge even more. I think at some point it will not just be, you know, separate topics of metaverse and AI and etc., but you'll see bits and pieces that all kind of run together. And like that also, I would hope that for the tech industry as a whole, that we get the chance to do some of the stuff that got me so excited about this urban sustainable development company, where they said, you know, it really doesn't matter who makes what hardware. It really doesn't matter what kind of things you have. What matters is how do you bind them together, and how do you create that potential for people to not have to worry about technology, you know, to not have to worry that their data gets somewhere, to not have to worry that they don't understand the technology, but for them to really just be able to use it. And I think there we have a responsibility and an opportunity to help make those things more accessible and easy and more safe than we do now. And that could be, you know, regulations. It's a combination of regulations, of traceability, of, you know, purgeability, but also of really making things in such an easy way, again, through maybe story and other help, that it becomes second nature and it's less daunting for people.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on this. I fully agree to that, and I hope it goes and develops in this direction as well. Let me ask you one more question. You gave already a lot of advice through your story as well to our listener in regards to career, but is there maybe one advice you would give to our listeners, to women in tech, regarding the future of tech and how they can find their place in the tech industry?
Yeah, I mean, can I give two pieces of advice? So I'll give one piece of advice that a very unlikely candidate gave me. I had a conversation with Al Gore at some point, and he actually told me the most important thing to succeed in career is to be able to navigate. So to really, try to understand where you want to go, and don't get focused on like, I need to get to point C, so A and B go before that. But really figure out what other ways are there. So don't give up, but what ways are there that I can get to that point? So I think navigating the industry, and that means learning about the industry, knowing where you want to end up, and then being open to your road there being really curvy, basically. I think that's one. At least that's how I interpreted what he told me. And the other thing I would say, sort of adjacent to that, is ask for help. It's really a strength to be able to ask for help. And if ever that becomes very difficult, I always remind myself, and I do this just now in my current situation, I love helping people because it makes me feel good. If somebody comes and I can do something quickly and there's something I can help with, it gives me a good feeling. So I try to keep that in mind and actually do ask for help from other people, because, I would do it too, and I would actually feel good about it. So I just try to imagine that the people that are helping me are feeling good about that. And that makes it feel less of a burden, and it makes it feel less scary to reach out for help. They can only say no, right? And I already have no. If I don't ask, I already have no. So I may as well ask.
Thank you very much. But before we close now this podcast, I also have 3 speed questions for you, and you just answer what's on top of your mind. The first one is, who is your favorite female role model?
Oof, what's on top of my mind? That's pretty hard. Princess Diana, I would say. Not tech at all. Do you want to know why also?
Yes, now I'm curious.
Well, she was the first person that really recognized what her potential was. And even though it was very hard for herself, she actually used it. And so what she did for PR and social media, I think, is something that, that changed a whole industry. And it's not necessarily about that I think that I can change a whole industry, but just being open enough, to really change and use what you have at your disposal.
What is your most important skill?
Learning.
And what is the best advice you were ever given, besides the one from Al Gore?
Trust in yourself.
Thank you very much for being our guest. It was very insightful. I could go on. I would love to listen to more, but we are also looking forward to having you at the We Tech Together Conference 2022. You're going to be a knowledge session speaker there, and I'm very excited to have you and listen to what you have to tell us then. And yeah, thanks a lot for being our guest.
Thank you so much. They were very interesting questions, and I loved being here. And thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really great, and I look forward to the conference.
Did you enjoy this episode? Don't forget to comment or rate us on your podcast app. Never want to miss an episode again? Sign up now for our newsletter on techface.ch, or follow us on Spotify or wherever you are listening to podcasts. Stay tuned and build your best career in tech.